Okay, so architecture under Justinian's reign, I thought of showing two emperors separated by around 200 years. Justinian was earlier, and compare them. Justinian was an emperor on the right side, so to speak, the Byzantine side of the Roman Empire, and Charlemagne on the eastern side, and the western, actually, the western. So Justinian east, Charlemagne west. Uh, this was, mosaic representation of a very important emperor whom the Orthodox Church, calls him a saint. So Justinian, he was born in 482 and died in 565, also known as Justinian the Great, was the Eastern Roman Emperor from 527 to 565. A long time. His reign was marked by the ambitious but only partly realized Renovatio Imperii, or restoration of the empire, the same ideal Charlemagne had. But it seems Charlemagne was able to do more in this sense. A still more resonant aspect of his legacy was the uniform rewriting of Roman law, the Corpus Juris Civilis, which is still the basis of civil law in many modern states. Quite something, no? I mean, almost 1,500 years ago. His reign was also marked by a blossoming of Byzantine culture, and his building program yielded works such as the Hagia Sophia. He's called Saint Justinian the Emperor in the Eastern Orthodox Church. Because of his restoration activities, Justinian has sometimes been known as the last Roman in mid-20th century historiography. Empress Theodora, also very important, his wife, and apparently with a strong influence on him. This is her. And both apparently born in humble origins. Theodore was an Eastern Roman empress by marriage to Emperor Justinian. She became empress upon Justinian's ascension in 527 and was one of his chief advisors, albeit from humble origins. Along with her spouse, Theodora is a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church and in the Oriental Orthodox Church, commemorated on the 14th of November and 28th of June, respectively. So both Justinian and Theodora are, highly esteemed by the Eastern Orthodox Church. Architecture. Justinian was a prolific builder. The historian Procopius bears witness to his activities in this area. Under Justinian's reign, the San Vitale in Ravenna, of which we know, I'm sure, very well, which features two famous mosaics representing Justinian and Theodora when we just saw them, was completed under the sponsorship of Julius Argentarius, a different kind of, not Justinian, but Julius. San Vitale in Ravenna, which is indeed one of the cornerstones, so to speak, of architecture, world architecture. The Basilica of San Vitale is a late antique church in Ravenna, Italy. The 6th century church is an important surviving example of early Christian Byzantine art and architecture. It is one of 8 structures in Ravenna inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. Its foundational inscription describes the church as a basilica, though its centrally planned design is not typical of the basilica form. And all histories of architecture have it, and it's still impressive. Even I would say that it even has somehow some kind of a modernity. I mean, because it is not adorned, it's just, the real thing is what you see is what you get. There are no superfluous things. But it's also the prestige, of course, of the age. I mean, this is, the Renaissance buildings that we admire are 1,000 years younger than this building. So, just the age gives it dignity that most buildings miss or do not have. The interior is magnificent. It's the house of God, and when you think about the fact that these artworks were made 1,005 years ago, 500 years ago, I don't know. This moves me very much. Um, so you know, there are Byzantine influences here, or influences coming from the east, but you know, it was built in Italy, and this emperor obviously had a prestige beyond the eastern part of the empire. Here is Theodora, the saint, and what can we say? I didn't see the building. I never visited it, but I regret. Now, most political leaders need the prestige of architecture, and to express the ideals and sometimes, maybe often, their vanity. Um, but not all of them have culture or sensitivity. Some leaders do, some leaders don't, and Romania was disfigured by a man who had ambitions and had vanity, but had no culture and no sensitivity really towards culture or architecture, and that's why he filled the country with miserable expressions of his ego. Now the church commits the same crime. Because I think the Cathedrala Neamului, the Cathedral of the People, is as megalomaniacal as the Casa Poporului, the House of the Republic. One in the profane field, the other one in the field of so-called sacred field. But they are both expressions of the ego of the leaders of the institutions they lead. And it's very, very sad. This is what happens when people in power arrive in that position, but they don't have the sensitivity and the culture to sustain them there in a legitimate way. The Patriarch of Romania talks about Brâncuș as being a Christian sculptor. Now, it's true that Brâncuș sang in the chorus in a church, but I wouldn't describe him as a Christian sculptor. Yes, he might have had some kind of, but in no way he's a so-called Christian sculptor. No way. Even the column of the infinite column, as someone described it, is a ring of conjunction between the earth and the sky, and it's beyond certain religious ideologies. It's and in other respects, he's almost pagan. So, but this is what happens. People without enough knowledge and sensitivity and subtlety of thought arrive in important positions, and from there rule with an iron fist. Anyway, nothing new in the world, and it's like this everywhere, not just here. But it moves me, here is Ravenna, and we have this concept in the present within the building. And, 1,005 years ago, 500 years ago, the building was erected, and 1,500 years later, some musicians play the instruments within the building. This shows a beautiful continuity that culture sometimes is able to achieve. It's amazing how buildings remained still erected after so many wars and so many tragedies. Certain buildings I guess are lucky. How else to describe it? Um, So this is the plan. Uh, different from the typical Christian church, but but this makes it even more interesting somehow because it is the beginnings always fascinate me, the beginnings of anything. And so it is the age, yes, but it's also the archetypal, the primordial roots. It's something here, that I don't know. I'm fascinated by. This roundness. It's a different. I mean, it is Christianity, but there is also something else to it, I would say. So, Ravenna, San Vitale, connected forever with the Emperor Justinian. Most notably, he had a Hagia Sophia, originally a basilica-style church that had been burned down during the Naranco riots, splendidly rebuilt according to a completely different ground plan under the architectural supervision of Isidore of Miletus and Anthemius of Tralles. I mean, who talks about these architects now? Very few, maybe some specialists in history, but I think it is important to know that we are not here, the children of a new world, that there were so many before us. And I'm sure some of them as animated by desire to build, to last as maybe we are. Although I think we kind of lost that. But what I'm trying to say, this Isidore of Miletus, and I didn't know anything about Anthemius of Tralles. They were great architects in that time, and we should remember them, I think. So, this building is, again, a masterpiece of world architecture, built by the Eastern Roman Emperor Justinian first as the Christian Cathedral of Constantinople for the state church of the Roman Empire between 532 and 537. Only 5 years, incredible. The church was then the world's largest interior space and among the first to employ a fully pendentive dome. It is considered the epitome of Byzantine architecture and is said to have changed the history of architecture. Something without doubt the cathedral built in Bucharest will never do. And this is, again, I am revolted and sorry for becoming so entangled in a way in local matters, but it is revolting, where we could have built a building of great significance. Instead, we ruined a great occasion to build an unbelievable mediocrity. Nobody knows who the architect is to begin with. Forget about Isidore of Miletus and Anthemius of Tralles. Forget about the countless geniuses in architecture who build churches. And here we build a church that is, almost the quintessential church of Romania, and we build it in the most mediocre and stupid kind possible. It's just incredible to me. I mean, it's revolting. And we are saying nothing. None of us says anything, The architects don't. The Union of Architects doesn't. The Order of Architects doesn't. The schools of architecture don't. Everybody is silent, and the calamity is being built and finalized with an immense financial effort, just like with Casa Poporului. It's unbelievable. The crime is committed twice. One in the name of the political ideology, the other one in the name of the so-called religious ideology. Anyway, moving forward, this is a great building, and yes, this is what you get when you use deeply felt culture and deeply felt faith, spirituality, and you have very skillful architects. This is what you get. And what you get if you don't use cultured and sensitive and talented architects, you get what we get here in Bucharest. simulacra. That building should come down. It's a calamity, just like its neighbor. Two calamities, it's incredible. Sorry that, I mean, I don't know, maybe there is someone here who is not from our country, but I'm just revolted. It is unacceptable. And the architects are silent. We don't say anything. Anyway, look at this building, I mean, this is, again, like, 1,500 years old. And look at this. It is splendid. It is strong. It is symbolic. It is centralized. It also has a periphery. Nothing changes its dignity. It doesn't matter. It is a cathedral or basilica or a mosque. It doesn't matter. Its greatness is beyond the divisions between religions. And this is the power of spirit, and this is the power of culture. But we have to reflect on these matters and not repeat certain mistakes. But, I send a message to 2,500 people, and, if I'm happy when 5 people show up out of 2,500. This is the great love of architecture. What can we do? Anyway, the building is great. I mean, it is one of the most important buildings in the world ever. And it doesn't matter. Some things are, so-called, affected by time. It's okay. Its greatness is intact. And so, Justinian was an emperor. Yes, he was not an architect, but he built this cathedral. I mean, who is the author of a building? Yes, he's the architect, but not just the architect. If you have an enlightened so-called client or beneficiary, the chance for a good building to come into being is higher. So here you had an emperor who was educated. If you read on Wikipedia, this was a very well-educated man. He was not, yes, he was born in humble origins, but he was very educated by his uncle. I don't know all the intricacies of his biography, but, quickly reading, I learned that this was an educated man, and this is very important. And that's why I keep telling the students, it's important to be educated, not for the sake of culture per se, but for the sake of serving architecture through knowing, not just through doing. It's easy to do if you don't know. Equally easy, perhaps, is to know without doing. The difficult thing was to unite the doing with the knowing. This is very difficult. As Greg Pasquarelli said when he was asked, this is a rather young, still kind of young North American architect. He runs together with his partners, the big firm in New York, shop, and they build a lot and not badly. He was asked, what do you recommend architects for the present? But he was asked in 2018. So he said, on one hand, history, theory, philosophy. On the other hand, the newest, most intense digital technologies. And I have pain in my chest to observe and to say that actually in both fields we are not so knowing really, because the technical technologies we do not study in school. Really, we are at a very primitive level. Photoshop, that's not architecture, or Adobe, that's not architecture. Even AutoCAD, it was invented by engineers for engineers. At this level, we cannot say that we know a lot about digital technologies. And in the field of theory, I have to say, what do we translate now? We translate learning from Las Vegas, that is from more than 50 years ago, and Delirious New York, also more than 50 years ago, or Adam's House in Paradise by Rick Wert, also 50 years ago. So, in 50 years, many other books, and some important books had been published. We are going probably to translate them, 50 years from now. But it's not really about translation. It's about knowing them and talking about them. We don't. So in both fields, theory, philosophy, history, and the digital world, we are not, really upfront. And this breaks my heart. But what can we do? We keep drawing with the T-square, the damn T-square until the fourth year. I mean, that's why I sent this message today with the projects in Vienna. You see the students, I mean, nobody works like this any longer. We still study perspective, manual perspective, when no office in the world will pay the graduate from our school to draw a manual perspective, because it's also a question of economics. To do a manual perspective, you need a few days. Well, what office in the world can allow itself to pay someone labor for a few days for a manual perspective of a simple building? I'm not talking about fluid architecture here, or I don't know what extravagances. To me, it's a loss of time, and I have all respect for perspective, but it was born in a different time. It was during the Renaissance, when human beings emerged out of the so-called darkness of the Middle Ages, an assertion of man. And it is a tool of control, of controlling. You control through linear perspective. We live in a different world where control is diminished, or should be diminished, through fluidity, through, even through chance encounters. Hazardous or ad hoc even architecture. So it's a different world affected by the digital realities, which we ignore. Linear perspective is totally inadequate for our time, totally. In fact, I would say that that irrational perspective of the Middle Ages, where, for example, if you loved your cousin, and your cousin was far away in the perspectival drawing, you would draw your cousin, with giant dimensions. And if you had a neighbor whom you hated and was very close to you in the drawing, or the viewer, very close to the viewer, you draw him or her very small. So the subjective side of perspective is also important. But no, the linear perspective is only concerned with the so-called objective truth. Well, what perspective was used to build this great building? None, because it was not known. What about the great French Gothic cathedral? None. What about Palladio? Palladio, I never saw a perspectival drawing of Palladio. I know he built a Teatro Olimpico, where he, built, a false perspective there, or an exaggerated perspective. But I never saw a drawing in perspective by Palladio, although Palladio was born 150 years after the Piero della Francesca and Brunelleschi, who apparently invented the perspective. So you can do great architecture without I almost feel like saying the terror of linear perspective. Linear perspective really irritates me now, because it's so self-confident. I put a vintage point. I draw all the lines there with a very untrembling hand, but the building becomes dead and static and paralyzed in its immobility. I go forward. According to Pseudo-Codinus, Justinian stated at the completion of this edifice, Solomon, I have outdone thee, in reference to the first Jewish temple. So that was the ambition of Justinian. He outdid Solomon. This new cathedral, with its magnificent dome, filled with mosaics, remained the center of Eastern Christianity for centuries. Another prominent church in the capital, the Church of the Holy Apostles, which had been in a very poor state near the end of the 5th century, was likewise rebuilt. The Church of Saints Sergius and Bacchus, later renamed Little Hagia Sophia, was also built between 532 and 536 by the imperial couple. Now, what did the so-called imperial couple do in Romania? They demolished churches. So you see, this is the difference between an emperor who was cultured and sensitive and a so-called emperor who had no culture and no sensitivity. And the results can only be disastrous. Church of the Holy Apostles. By the reign of the Emperor Justinian I, the church was no longer considered grand enough, and the new Church of the Holy Apostles was built on the same site. The historian Procopius attributes the rebuilding to Justinian, while the writer known as Pseudo-Codinus attributes it to the Empress Theodora. Who cares? They were, husband and wife. The new church was designed and built by the architects, the same, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidorus of Miletus, the same architects of the Hagia Sophia, and was consecrated on the 28th of June, 550. The relics of Constantine and the three saints were reinstalled in the new church, and the mausoleum for Justinian and his family was built at the end of its northern arm. Well, I didn't find too many images. This is a digital recreation. Here is an image, the day of consecration or something. Anyway, it was an important building. The little Hagia Sophia was. I'm a little bit confused because I think it was rebuilt. I have to double check this, or some of you could. As I said, I'm not truly at my best in the field of history, but I have a longing for honoring what is to be honored. And I think, I don't like emperors in general, but Justinian and Charlemagne, I think, deserve to be known because during them, leading, a great architecture happened to be built, and they had a role in this, an important role. So for those of you who came a little bit later, this is not Charlemagne. You will arrive soon at Charlemagne. This is his predecessor in a way, but on the eastern part of the so-called Roman Empire. Well, it was already broken, but so the Byzantine side. And then we'll go to Charlemagne, who was the emperor of the western side, and he tried to unify Europe, and that's why he was called the father of Europe. But these buildings move me, as I said, and I'm sure they move anybody because of the, even if it was rebuilt, I'm sure something of the old structure was kept, at least the atmosphere, if nothing else. Okay, now we go to Charlemagne, and today I chose to talk a little bit about Justinian architecture because I had that presentation made, and it's just a sketch at this point. But maybe next year we'll know a little more about him as well. So Carolingian architecture. This is how it is called, the architecture during the time of Charlemagne. Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, he died actually on this day, the 28th of January in 1814, numbered or called Charles Ier, Charles I, was the king of the Franks from 768, the king of the Lombards from 1770-74, and the emperor of the Romans from 800. During the early Middle Ages, he united the majority. Well, I don't know if this is quite a correct wording, early Middle Ages. This is a little bit earlier than that, but okay, let's say in a way, the dark, the dark times before the true Middle Ages. But it doesn't really matter. It was around the year 800 before the Romanic, and certainly almost 4 centuries before the birth of the Gothic per se. So he united the majority of Western and Central Europe. He was the first recognized emperor to rule from Western Europe since the fall of the Western Roman Empire around 3 centuries earlier. The expanded Frankish state that Charlemagne founded is called the Carolingian Empire. He was later canonized by anti-pope, I don't know what that means, anti-pope Pascal III. Charlemagne has been called the father of Europe, Pater Europae, as he united most of Western Europe for the first time since the classical era of the Roman Empire, and united parts of Europe that had never been under Frankish or Roman rule. His rule spurred the Carolingian Renaissance, a period of energetic cultural and intellectual activity within the Western Church. I truly think we need badly, again, some kind of energetic cultural and intellectual activity to fight off actually the caresses of capitalism through the pleasure principle. There is a Romanian poet in the United States. He immigrated some years ago, and he said when the Berlin Wall fell, he said we replaced the Berlin Wall with the Berlin Mall, and metaphorically he referred to the fact that we banished the communist ideology, but instead we borrowed or we imported the consumer's ideology. So the W of the wall turned upside down became an M. So the wall became a mall. A Charlemagne silver coin from 1812, so he was still alive, that was coined in Frankfurt, is this one. And look at him as he apparently, I don't know, unidealized look like, but then you'll see an idealized portrait, very, very, very different. But this is what artists do for the right rewards. So the bust of Charlemagne, an idealized portrayal and reliquary said to contain Charlemagne's skull cap, is located at Aachen's cathedral treasury and can be regarded as the most famous depiction of the ruler. Is this one? Now you tell me, because you have a good eye, because you are architects, what's the resemblance between this and this? No resemblance at all. In fact, they are, dichotomically opposed. But what can you do? With a poetical license, the artist represented him in a very dignified and splendid, almost celestial way. Some kind of, Jesus on earth. But maybe these people were closer to truth. Maybe, I don't know. That is very possible. And this was coined while he was alive, as opposed to this, which came later. Anyway, so, and the arm reliquary of Charlemagne at the same cathedral, Aachen Cathedral, is this one. Now, I wouldn't play games with this arm, to be honest with you. I mean, this is the arm, almost the arm of God. I mean, I don't know, it's something about it. I mean, yes, there is that little window on his shirt, like in the case of a minister who got his anti-pandemic shot a few days ago through something like this. I don't know what that was in the case of this, reliquary, but anyway, Charlemagne, a great, great emperor. Now we look at the Carolingian city, famed for its culture and arts, and we look at a building that is from his time. It's the town, the city, I don't know what it is, a town, a city, anyway, a human settlement called Lorsch. And this is a building from, I don't know, around 800. 800 before the Romanic, before the early Gothic. And yes, the prestige of time cannot be undervalued. I remember from all the buildings I saw in my life, and I didn't really see so many, but I saw some. The one that impressed me the most was the Temple of Hera in Paestum in the south of Italy, which was pre-Doric. So let's say around 2,500 years ago, it was built. Unbelievable building that maybe also was my own perception based on the fact that I knew it was so old. But I think it was more than that, because I remember I had an incredible emotion there, and I read later that if couples unable to achieve fertility spent a night in the proximity of the temple of Hera in Paestum would become fertile without question. And Goethe loved it, Winkelmann loved it, Louis Kahn loved it, Piranesi loved it. So it was something about it, but also the age, 2,500 years. This one is 1,000, I don't know. No, let me, I am not adding properly. No, I am adding 1,200. So it's almost half of the age of the temple in Paestum. Anyway, age does matter. Of course, if we think about our buildings, how much they will last, we have all the reasons for depression. I mean, nobody thinks in these terms, to last our building, any of our buildings for 1,000 years, 2,000 years. Although I have to say, in New York, there are skyscrapers that were built more than 100 years ago, and they are in an impeccable state. It's actually amazing. They were built very, very, very well. So who knows? Anyway, that is if we don't start a nuclear war, because then, that's the end of it all. So this gateway from the monastery, the Abbey of Lorsch, is around 800. And I imagine it's genuine, at least some parts of it, the ornamental parts, but the structure as well. It's a nice little building, maybe a little bit too sweet, but maybe it was embellished a little bit in time. I don't know, but it was refurbished. I mean, you look at the ceramic tiles on the roof, and it's kept in a very good shape. It was just a gate. We don't have gates any longer. We don't. In the 19th century, architects built gates. In England, they had lots of gates. We don't. It's a program, a function that we don't use any longer. And that's maybe because we dematerialized, that sense of identity which a gate into an estate serves. We have fences, yes, we have doors, but not gates, and not for a public, not truly for the public real. Maybe we have for private, estates or residences or whatever. The church in the same town, sorry about the Alami ornament, but I don't know, it looks impressive. It is simple, but its massivity is, I don't know, it is, for me, a source of emotion. This kind of walls we don't do any longer. We might mimic the thickness in a certain way, but to build it, with walls thick, I don't know, 2-3 meters, we don't do, except Le Corbusier did it at Ronchamp. At Ronchamp, the wall towards the south, in some parts, is very, very thick. At the bottom is about 2 meters thick. And you wonder, why did he do it like this? Because all the other walls have the same thickness and they are very thin. Only the wall towards the sun. This is very interesting. Normally, today, if we build a building towards the south, we open up our building with a lot of glass to embrace the solar light and so on. No, exactly there, he arrested, well, he pierced that thick wall. But conflictually, it's a very thick wall oriented towards the sun, towards south. Very interesting. He also gives the entrance into that building not from the west, as the dogma would require, but from the south, from that wall, that thick wall. And I remember when I visited Ronchamp, I had a, I said this before, and maybe it's worth mentioning it again. I had a strange feeling when I was reading Le Corbusier's words on the glass, on the stained glass windows. His dialogue with Marie, Marie being the mother of Jesus. I had a feeling was a little bit too casual and too intimate. I mean, after all, who talked like this with, the son of God's mother, meaning Marie? But he did. And later on, I read that his mother was also Marie. And some critics think that Ronchamp, in all its glory, was built, at least unconsciously, not just for Marie, the mother of Jesus, but also for Marie, the mother of the architect. And that thick wall towards the south could be interpreted and analyzed perhaps with a psychoanalytical key. Very interesting story, I think, about Ronchamp. Anyway, back to Charlemagne and this little building. There were other buildings. We are going to see a few more. You imagine not too many buildings survived from 1,200 years ago, but this is one of them. Now another one. Sorry about the German. Even this one is some kind of a gate, and it's nice, but you can tell it's a remnant from a larger structure. No, it's actually the same building seen from the back. Let me see if some of you or someone knows German. Maybe it's the same cluster, in Losch. This is how it looks like from the other side. I mean, when you see this picture, you would say this is, there is a lot of green around. And then you see here that, there are buildings all over around the building. Anyway. Now, monastery, a convent of St. John in Münster, 800 Benedictine convent. Even here, you can tell there were parts that were modified. So we don't know, maybe the tower was from that time, or I don't know. It doesn't look too old to me. It's hard, over such a long period of time. There are all kinds of interventions, of refurbishments, of who knows. I guess something here in what we see is indeed from 800s, from his time. And the interior seems to be authentic. This kind of pictorial representation is earlier than the Middle Ages. Yeah, the interior seems to me more authentic than the exterior. This is also true of Notre Dame de Paris. The western facade was cleaned up for the tourists to take nice pictures in front of it, but strangely it looks more authentic and older somehow from the back, from the west side, from the apside. Although that one is newer and with the interventions of Viollet-le-Duc. So what can we say? But you have to take care of a building. The interior here, it does look genuine. And I like it very much. Palatine Chapel in Aachen, also from around 800. Um, Now this is an ample, a more ample, I mean, I don't know why it is called a chapel. It's, look at it. To me, this is not a chapel. This is either a sum of chapels or a cathedral or a basilica, or, but even here, I don't know exactly, maybe only a part of this building was built during his time. But what we see here, what I see here now, is still very impressive. And it has this feeling of some kind of an urban conglomerate, architectural conglomerate, various parts brought together maybe by the imperial will, or I don't know. Interesting. And it looks very, in my opinion, very cosmopolitan somehow. This is not a primitive, awkward architecture. No, it's cosmopolitan. I think it has this, very urban character. I mean, when you think about it, this was built 1,200 years ago. I mean, Alberti was 500 years ago. So this was much older, but still it has this urban presence, this sophistication somehow, and it is a hybrid complex. And inside is also impressive. Uh, Charlemagne, with all the power that an emperor had, I'm talking about a cultured emperor, because we have seen other kinds of emperors. Thank God Hitler didn't arrive at building his megalomaniacal white, Berlin. Uh, this obsession with whiteness, psychoanalysis quite well connects this with cleaning, compulsive cleaning disorder. Those with criminal tendencies have a tendency to clean up, excessively something, because instead of working on their own psychic, they clean up, I don't know, plates or cities or even races. No, because what else was the concentration camp? That man hated himself, and instead of working with himself, well, Freud was not yet. No, he was actually. In fact, I don't know if you know, Sigmund Freud had in his office a little watercolor, apparently painted by Hitler, that he bought, I don't know, at a flea market or an antique store. I read this article. I don't know if I trusted this article, but if it was true, it's very strange. Can you imagine Freud buying, and it represented the church, a medieval little church in the landscape that the sweet boy called Adolf Hitler painted in a moment of great, sensitivity. I don't know. There are strange things happening in human society and human history. But call it a chapel, call it whatever. It is splendid. And I wonder what these people felt, when these buildings were erected. I mean, they were not flooded with movies from Hollywood and, memes and all kinds of, visual excesses. I think they were astonished. Well, they had to wait for a long time sometimes, that such a building was not built, overnight. Even by an emperor, it took years. Although we saw some of them were not built in a long time at all. So here we see, several buildings. The Basilica of San Vitale, built by Justinian. Justinian in the center, on the right is this so-called chapel, the round part, and what happened afterwards you can see around it. And then the floor plan of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem from 325. So, Interesting comparison between these plans. Now, let us be honest, it's not bad to have a client who is an emperor. I mean, if he is a good emperor with a good character and cultured and sensitive, it's almost an ideal because that emperor puts at your disposal whatever you want to receive. You know, like Francois Premier invited Leonardo to his castle in at Chambord in France. And, you know, you had these enlightened kings and emperors, maybe not too many, although even in China, they had, you know, they had in China, they had emperors who practiced the art of calligraphy, who wrote poetry. Can you imagine? For us today, the presidents of countries are usually lawyers or businessmen. Do you know of a president of a country today who writes poetry and exercises his hand at calligraphy? It would be unimaginable. Now, it's true, I have a tendency to idealize the past, but still, I would like to know that my country is run by you know, a man who does beautiful calligraphies and also writes poetry. I wouldn't mind at all. I would like something like this, but it's probably inconceivable today. Now, not in capitalism. You're either a lawyer or a businessman. That's it. Uh, or like the ex-president of the United States, you know, a builder of casinos. You know. At least he didn't build brothers like his grandpa. Uh, anyway, oratory in Germany, Germany de Pré, 806. Now this one looks like a real thing, at least from this side. Um, I mean, you don't need more than this. In fact, if you build just a so-called banal, thick, straight wall, without any pretension for great architecture or even to configure a space, and just let it be there, grow old for 1,000 years, I think that wall, that so-called banal wall, becomes some kind of a marvel, you know, some kind of a jewel, architectural jewel. It's the age, you know, 1,000. I mean, think of these cylinders, you know, they are 1,200 years old. And maybe I don't see correctly, but somehow I have a feeling that they are as old as I said they are, and touched by the sunlight, they become splendid. And the interior is saying the same story. That is the story of a great long time that passed through this building. And now decorations is just austerity, but this austerity was sweetened in a way, was softened, I think is a better word, by time. Although I usually advocate the cause of the ornament, but I also love an architecture that is pure and simple and you know, even with a certain degree of dignified austerity. How well a building built with organic materials ages. Even if it is a ruin, it integrates well somehow because it returns, the brick returns to the earth that it came from. The stone is the stone. And but I think with the materials that we have today, I don't think they age. They can age very well now. Uh, Now, what do you do with a structure that is all steel and glass? You know, how would it age? Um, Look at the plastic triangle and the wooden triangle. The wooden triangle, even though it might not work very well because the edge of the wooden triangle is a little bit, you know, damaged, but he still has, I would say, a nobility. while the poor plastic triangle it becomes, I don't know, almost worthless somehow. Sorry, I have compassion for the plastic triangle. I wouldn't like to. I what if I was that plastic triangle? Unable even to age. The Imperial Palace, completed after 814, 814 in Ingelheim. I don't know what remains still alive. Here we see some kind of a presumed plan. Some ruins, yes, some fragments. That stair is obviously not from Charlemagne's time. Um, what can you do? The same happened with at Tivoli, with the villa, the great villa of the great emperor Adrian. Adrian. We have some ruins, but even as ruins, I don't know. I like these ruins affected by infiltrations of water than these stairs, which are newer. Uh, but maybe it's just my attraction towards the past and nothing else. Um, this is, you know what it is. Um, mental constructions. Maybe this could also be built, in a real context, to come with a wire structure, a structure like the echo of an old of a former building, and create this strange dialogue between the ghost of a gun building and the present. Um, it's like materializing discreetly. In a way, maybe Ishigami at one point was pointing a little bit in this direction, just to very, very discreetly suggest a presence that is actually not there. The walls, another abbey in Saint Philibert de Grandlieu. What can we say? Maybe these buildings don't have any longer the aura and the greatness that perhaps once they had. But what can we do? They are old indeed. Sorry about this. I don't know what is happening with. It's only there. Yes, only there. But even what is seen above, I think, has some dignity and some architectural interest. Yes, it is the aura, the prestige of time, but also the prestige of the matter that was used for building the building. That when you think that one of those bricks is 1,200 years old, I don't know, just in itself becomes something special, I think. Walls. We don't believe so much any longer in walls, certainly not in thick walls. And it would be hard to believe when we know that we have atomic bombs. I mean, how could you? I'm sure Charlemagne himself would not have built in this way in the 21st century. We could pulverize them, in a second. It happened in Hiroshima, it happened in Nagasaki, it could happen anytime, unfortunately. So the destructive power of man is immense, and under a sky populated with satellites and planes and rockets and bombers, how could you continue to live under the sky and build in this way? I don't think it's possible. Unless you lie to yourself and ignore what is real actually up there. I mean, I mentioned Ronchamp. Ronchamp is near an airport, and when I was inside the church, the chapel, I've heard very very strong noise because the airport is very close. So the plane flies just above it at a not very impressive height. So you know I remember once I was in the auditorium at Columbia University, and it was at the end of the 20th century, and there was a lot of malaise and pessimism, and I found myself saying something to everybody that I was surprised myself. I just couldn't shut up. I said, "We forgot to live under the sky." And I remember the man who ran the theory department at Harvard, Michael Hayes, stood up and almost shouted. He said, "One shouldn't read too much Heidegger." Uh, anyway, Charlemagne, Église de Saint-Philibert de Grand-Lieu. Another abbey in Belgium, this time uh, surprisingly well kept, inside surprisingly clean. It disturbs me a little bit. So much cleanness, it's suspect. It's too much. It cannot be like this from 800. But yeah, it was taken care of excessively, so to speak. St. Michael's Fulda Rotunda and Crypt, 822. Even here, I don't know. Was everything from his time? Is everything from his time? I don't know. But it seems to have a certain level of authenticity and old age. But who knows? I used to live in Paris near a cathedral that I loved. In fact, I loved it more than Notre Dame. And I learned later that it was from the 19th century. And so, sometimes a lie tells the truth more convincingly than truth itself. I know I said something paradoxical, but I think sometimes people lie when they tell the truth and vice versa. They tell the truth when they lie. I know maybe it doesn't make sense. Maybe I should take a rest. Maybe I made too many presentations. But I reflected on this sometimes when I didn't understand a certain person in my life. And I had a feeling that she was lying when she was telling the truth and telling the truth when she was lying. But this doesn't seem to lie. What we see here in the inside seems to be truth. But what is the relationship between truth and untruth? I remember a painting by Remedios Varo, the great painter. She painted a painting where the shadow of a human being was standing up, and the so-called real person with a tie and a white shirt was flattened in its place, in the place of the shadow. So, what is the relationship between the shadow and the real, so-called the real body, the real person? When I was going through my middle life crisis, I even wrote something, and it was actually about me. I imagined a man whose shadow was following his body, but 2 feet away from his body. It's like I don't know. It's as if a man is actually fractured from his own soul or something like this. Anyway, the relationship between the shadow and the body is an interesting one. I read in a book, The Golden Buff, that even in Transylvania, there were such beliefs, superstitions, that if you step on the shadow of someone at midday, exactly at midday, that person would die, I don't know, next day or in a few days. The relationship between the seen and the unseen, between the concrete and uh, the shadowy is complex. I don't know very well why I'm talking about these things, but because I'm concerned with authenticity. What is authentical? And I think this seems to be authentic, old, from 1,200 years ago. But do I know actually? It's just an intuition, but I could be wrong. Um, well, those, the the tiles on the roofs are certainly not from 1,000 to 200 years ago. That is clear to naked eye, to the naked eye. Also, you see during this time and also Justinian's time, roundness, the circle was very, very present. We don't do any longer churches like this on a or circular plan. And I think this is a problem. Um, Stones. The stone awaits again its workers, the true workers. Basilica from Steinbach, 827. I forgot in what year he died, 800 something. He might have been dead by now at 827. This one also looks with a certain level of, the authority of being genuine or authentical. I could be wrong, I don't know. But inside, no, I'm not. I was wrong doubting, because inside, or it's just appearance, maybe it's just appearance, maybe this is just theater, architectural theater, but I don't think it is. I love that ceiling. It's flat, but it's convincing, with wood, and then the walls, you can tell that, I don't know, they seem real to me, unchanged by time somehow. I wouldn't mind having my studio here. No, I said something, please forgive me. No, this is a church. No, what is it? A basilica. No. I'm too much of a purist to accept the appropriation of a sacred space and its transformation into a secular way of life, or I don't know. No. Although I know this is almost a fashion, even in the United States, not so much in England. In England, I've heard twice a year a church is desacralized and is dedicated to, at one point, a circus bought a church or rented it because of the high ceilings, so they could exercise their acrobatic works and so on. In the house of God. But maybe God smiles with affection and indulgence at the acrobats. Who knows? Plus, many churchmen, I'm talking about the priests, aren't they some kind of acrobats in the demagogical, rhetorical sermons? I think they are sometimes. Anyway, time. It's really about time. As I said, if you build a wall now and it lasts for 1,000 years, that wall would be considered sacred. Although that's all you did, you built a wall, but not of sheetrock and I don't know. No, a real wall like this, 1 meter thick and tall. I don't know, not too tall and made of either stones or bricks or who knows. Just a wall, that's it, and you accomplish something in this life. Another church from Frankfurt, Saint Justinus. Interestingly, it's called Saint Justinus. So, was it destined to Justinian by Charlemagne? I doubt it. It seems very ample. It is very ample, but I don't know if it was all built then. Yeah, Charlemagne, the father of Europe. The trees, though, are interesting. I don't know what kind of tree that is, but it's rather exotic, looks to me. Very strange. I never saw trees like this. Apropos of trees, when I visited the villa, Tivoli villa by, the Emperor Adrian's, I was very prepared for the architecture. I knew there were ruins, but before I arriving at the ruins, I went through between many olive trees, and I fell in love with those olive trees. I filmed them for about 2 hours. In fact, when I arrived at the building, I was not so impressed. But the olive trees, and later on I learned that they are some of the oldest trees in the world, that they last for many years. I really had a feeling those trees were seeing through me, that they were understanding me. I had this, strange thought that yes, that they were wise, that they were seers, and that they were seeing through me better than they were understanding me better than I was understanding myself. Um, I don't know what this tree that we saw before is. I don't know anything about trees except that I love them. Um, I'm the same way with flowers. I don't know too many flowers. In fact, for me, all flowers are flowers. I don't know their names. I know a few, of course, roses and. No, I don't actually. No, for me, flowers are flowers, and trees are trees. I'm terrible at this, at technicalities of anything actually. So please do not wait to receive to find out from me technicalities or precise definitions because I'm terrible. Castle, again, I don't know. This is obviously not from Charlemagne's time. Maybe this, maybe I don't know. Maybe this, I don't know. Uh, it's hard to tell. But I think it is important today, and I'm approaching the end now. We talked a little bit about Justinian, the great Byzantine emperor, and about Charlemagne, the father of Europe, as he was called, from the western side of Europe. Both very important emperors. Emperors are, as we know, or could be nuisances. But these two emperors had, maybe they were nuisance as well, I don't know. But they also had a major role in culture, and they were both very interested in architecture, and some great buildings were built during the time when they were uh, leaders. 885, he was already dead, but maybe the building was begun when he was still an emperor, and his legacy went on. Another another sacred building, another ecclesiastical building. uh, this one, who knows if the pictorial representations were done during his time. Maybe, I don't know, but what we see seems to be different from what we saw earlier. In some cases, perhaps some of the paintings had were affected by time. Maybe not all artists painted like Leonardo, who used so-called innovative technique for his frescoes, and that's why they have a hard time now to make them last, because he didn't use the traditional technique, and they just vanish. Just like in the movie Roma by Federico Fellini, where the archaeologists exploring the underground of Rome came across some frescoes that in a second, when they lit them up, vanished, just vanished. They were building a subway. The Church of Santa Maria del Naranco, St. Mary of Mount Aranco, is a Roman Catholic pre-Romanesque church. So this must be understood. Charlemagne lived and led before the Romanesque, Romanic architecture, and even more removed from the beginning of the Middle Ages, the Gothic times. And this is in Spain. I like this building very much, actually. It's both familiar and strange. Uh, it's so simple now, but it's striking, and it's striking on both sides. It's probably one of the best buildings built during Charlemagne's time. Equally impressive inside. So you see, we keep talking about space, 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 and space again, but it's not just about space. Of course, space is important, but also the materiality of the walls, what matter you use, what matters, what materials you use. Here, you know, the same space could, in fact, it could be tested. You could build exactly the same space, but with various materials. And you'll see that the feeling is different. Here, it's almost like a maternal womb because of the, you know, because of the walls, what they are made of. And it doesn't matter that these little stairs do not have a parapet, or it's the materiality, the archaic work is still moving. And I don't know, I think this is so important. So it's not just space. You know, we only talk about space together with Bruno Sevi, but it's not just space. I mean, to me, with all due respect for Tadao, but this fragment of a wall of this old church is more, you know, it's richer for me visually, but not just visually, than any polished, beautiful concrete wall built by Tadao, which has no surprises in it. This one, with its imperfections, is warm and I don't know, richer for me. It is richer. We don't build narrative architecture these days. Here is a narrative architecture. If you knew the codes of the Bible, you could have the story that is in the Bible. You would have understood some of the things that I don't. So, but they still move me artistically, visually. I like this building, one of the best. And this is the plan. Very simple, but the building is again, you see the space, the plan is very simple, no? If we build exactly on this plan today, we would have something very predictable, you know, with white walls and clean and smooth. But I don't know, this building and maybe its genuineness is also connected with the fact that it's not ignoring gravity. And this is the virtue of the stone. The stone is, you know, it's too heavy to say to gravity, I'm sorry, I don't care about you. Now, the stone cannot say something like this. It's impossible. Excellent building. Really, I don't know what you think, but I love this building. Even the crypt. Of course, some people might think of a beautiful bodega here, or, you know, God. Anyway, some people think that wine is of a noble origin, almost divine, certainly Bacchus. So I shouldn't smile ironically at the nobility of wine. Um, I didn't drink wine in 30 years. If I am addicted to anything, I'm addicted to buttermilk. This is actually my strongest addiction besides books. I even felt like writing something, a piece called Addicted to Buttermilk. I know it's nothing glorious. Who would trust a man who is addicted to buttermilk? It's ridiculous, you know. I mean, it's nothing heroical. Actually, it's very good buttermilk. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Anyway, Sharman, you soon will say goodbye to you. We remembered you on the day when you died. And of course, from a point of view that is architectural, because this is our obsession, our interest. Thank you very much.